In this video, I'm going to cover another looping construct. This construct that I'm going to cover is called a while loop. Now, you can use a while loop in a program, Java or otherwise, if you want a block of code to be executed until a certain condition is met. Like, for example, if you're trying to add a number or you're trying to increment a number and you want to kind of execute that code until a certain condition is met. Now, this differs from a for loop. A for loop, you want to iterate code or use iterate code for a specific number of times, like for I equals 1 to 10 or something like that. A while loop works differently. It's a looping construct just like a for loop, except in a while loop, we execute that code while a certain condition is true. So let me put in the following simple while loop. We're going to put in a while loop on line number 5, and this is what it looks like. We're going to say while I is less than 5, we're going to say system out print line, and we're just gonna write out to the system what the value of I is. Easy peasy. So this is a very simple while loop. What happens is we have the condition on line 5, which is, while I is less than 5, to execute the block of code between line 5 and line 7. Right now we only have one line of code that gets executed, but as you can imagine, it does get much more complicated than this. So if I wanted to put in more code to get executed while that condition is true that I have on line 5, or while I is less than 5, I would put it between the opening brace on line 5 and the closing brace on line 7. So if I execute this code, it's going to just write out to the system terminal on the right hand side the current value of I. So remember, iterations usually start at 0. So it'll first iteration should show 0, second should show 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I need to put up semicolon at the end of line 4, and why I do this, I'm going to have some problems. Like, for example, I'm just going to show you some pitfalls you're going to run into. Notice what happens is on the terminal, it just says 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. This is kind of expected that I put in just to show you what happens if you don't actually meet the condition. So since I is less than 5, if I is always less than 5, we have an infinite loop. So what I need to do is I need to do something with I. Like on line 7, I'm like, well, how about I plus plus, which is the equivalent of saying I equals I plus 1. Because we were in an infinite loop before, because until I do something with I is always going to be less than 5. So I'm kind of stuck here. So if you get in an infinite loop like this, you're going to have to reload your program and kind of break out of that loop. Because right now, behind the scenes, line 6 is being executed again, 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 and again. And it's happening so fast you don't see it in the terminal window on the right, but believe me, it's executing right now. So you're in an infinite loop. While I is less than 5, it will never be equal to or greater than 5. So we're kind of stuck. So on line 7, I need to say something with with I. What are we doing with it? Are we going to add to it, or what are we going to do? And this is kind of like an academic exercise. So on line 7, I'm doing I plus plus, which is the equivalent of saying I equals I plus 1. So let me just kind of break this program here. I'll do an exit page, and I'm just going to have to reload it. You guys will have to do this too. And you can see here where it says snap, you're going to see that there is a infinite coding loop right here. So just going to click on reload. Hopefully you saved your program or you have it to the clipboard. Then when Coding Ground reloads, I'm going to have to paste my program back in. So big problem that you need to be aware of and you can avoid. So anyway, so I got my code posted back in. So let me click on execute, and I should get some output in my terminal window on the right hand side. Once I click on execute, it's executing. I should see 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So again, this is an academic exercise. We're going to make this more interesting in a minute. But just to demonstrate what a while loop does, the while loop executed the line of code 6 and 7 while I was less than 5. And we just get the expected output 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's make this a little bit more business savvy or a little bit more flexible. And let's put together an example that makes a little bit more sense of why you would use a looping structure like a while with a real program that does like real things. And let's just see what it kind of looks like. Let's write a program that does the following. Let's just say we start with $1 and we give our child $1 and we tell our child that what mom and dad will do, what I will do is I will give you a 1% return on your dollar every month. And, every first month I'll give you 1% return, second month 1% return, and I'll keep on going all the way until you get to $10. Maybe we're teaching our kid about how interest works. So we're going to say we're going to start with $1, and I'm going to give you 1% interest per month until you get to $10. And then your child says, oh, thank you, Mommy and Daddy. How long will it be before I have $10? Well, that's a good example, for this example here, is to write a program with a while loop. So we can say, while I is less than 10. If I represents the dollars that we're giving our kid, in this case 1, as long as I is less than 10, let's execute code and constantly compound the interest by taking the amount of money, which is I, which is the dollar, then multiplying it by 1.01, which would be what 1% compound interest would be. So I'm just going to put that comment in here. I'll say if I start with $1 and get 1% interest per month, when will I get $10? And let's say, how about this? It'll be, we'll do this one line at a time. It's not going to be perfect. I'm sure I'm going to have an error or two. But let's just say we start with I equals 1, which is $1. Now we need to change our while loop. For example, here we still got our old while loop while I is less than equal to 5. Just add 1 to I. But we're doing something different this time. What we're going to do is we're going to say, if I is equal or is less than or equal to 10, we're going to change that in a second. But what we'll do here is for the business logic, or we'll just add the code that I equals I times 1.01. So, we start with $1, and every time this loop iterates, we add 1% to it. So we finish that up by changing line 8, saying, well, if I is less than 10, what we'll do is we'll say this is what I is, and then we'll multiply it by 0.01. And let me change the comment here. So each iteration is just 1 month. Every time we go through the code is 1 month. So I equals, in this case, I equals the dollar amount. So while I is less than 10, we'll just write out what the value of I is, and then we'll multiply it by 1%. I still got some problems, though. Remember how casting and how variable typing works in Java. What's going to happen here is line 10 is going to be a problem for us because I is an integer. And what we're doing is in line 10 is we're multiplying it by non-integer values, in this case a double or a float. So there's various ways to fix this. I'm going to fix this by just going on line 7 and say, you know what, I is not an integer anymore, it's a double. So that should solve our problem there. So now that I is a double, if I execute this, I should loop through in lines 8, 9, and 10, and it should loop and give us one iteration, and it'll keep on going and going and going and going until I is equal to 10. But here's the thing. It's finished executing. We just don't see it because we never said the put system.out or whatever that it's done executing. I always say, what did you expect? Balloons that fall from the ceiling? So how about we do this? I'm going to add in another integer. I'm going to call this number of months. So the number of months will represent here every time this while loop iterates. It could be any interval. It could be months. It could be years. You get to pick, what an iteration is. It could be a day if you're going to give it 1% interest a day. So on line 12, I'm just going to say num months plus plus, which is the same as saying num months equals num months plus 1. So I did my math in the previous step where I'm just constantly looping through until I get to $10. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the system that output line. Now notice this is out of the while loop. So when the while loop is finished, what's going to happen is this line of code 14 will get executed. And it'll just say, in this case, I'll say it will take, and I'll put in the number of months that it took to get to $10. So anyway, a little bit of a question. Do I put an I here, or do I put in none months? Think about that. I'm not saying what I'm doing here is correct. Remember, I is equal to the dollar amount, and num months is how many times we actually iterate through this while loop. So I is probably incorrect, even though that this will run after I give line 14 a semicolon. We probably want to not put an I in here. We'd probably, in this case, just want to say, in line 14, this is the number of months. But if you wanted, you could put an I in here. I is just going to show you, in this case, the last value of what I was. So if you execute it, it's gonna execute the lines, or the while code from line 7 through line 12 as soon as I fix line 14, which I just mentioned. So let me fix that. Execute the code, and line 10, 11, and 12 is being executed forever. Well, not forever, but until, right, while I is less than 10. So then it says it'll take, and this is actually kind of misleading. It'll say it'll take 10.05 months. Remember, I there is only the last value of that dollar amount. What we really need here on line 14 is the number of months, which is the integer value of how many times that we went through that looping structure. Now I can maybe, I was going to maybe pull this out, make it, put line 14 all on one line. I don't need to do that. So let me click on execute. I click on execute. It's going to, again, just go through that while loop. And then when that while loop is done executing, when I is equal to or greater than 10, it says it will take 232 months. Now, this was a simple example of a while loop. Now, while loops are looping structures, kind of like for loops, but you use them differently. You can loop while a condition is true, as opposed to a for loop where you could go until a certain condition is met or a fixed number of times. That's all I had for you today. Thank you.